If there is something in the world that has delighted you, a painting, a statue, a book, a podcast episode, anything. I mean, it can be anything. I don't think I can oversell how powerful it is for the creator of that thing to get a note from you in some way. You can write to them, you can email them, you can tweet at them, you can slip into their DMs, whatever we're using, messenger pigeon, I don't know, whatever the latest phrase is. Because I have found that in my life where I've written books, there's basically no better moment than when someone has like read the book, liked it, and just let me know that they read it and liked it, right? Because a lot of these things are like messages in a bottle. You sort of throw them into the ocean, you hope somebody reads it, right? That's that, but I would say that's true across the board. I have tried to live out this habit. If I read something online that I like a good essay, it's like automatic. I will just write to the person that took the time to do it for no other reason than that I think that we should do more of that, right? Because it's not for network, there's no purpose to it. It is actually like a pure expression of gratitude for the creative thing.
Welcome to the Unscripted Authentic Leadership Podcast. I am your host, John LeBrun, and I am so excited to introduce today's guest, Jimmy Soni. Jimmy is a speaker, speechwriter, dad, award-winning author. His latest book, The Founders, the story of PayPal and the entrepreneurs who shaped Silicon Valley, was debut bestseller and has earned praise from Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the New Yorker, the Economist, and so many more. So family, I just can't wait to introduce to you Jimmy Soni. Jimmy, welcome to the show.
John, thank you so much for having me. Though that's one of those intros where I almost want to be like, and the show's over, folks. Like, just so I screw it. But thank you. That was a very generous intro, and I'm delighted to be here.
I have to make it sound good so everybody wants to tune in to the Jimmy Soni show.
Let's keep expectations in check, man. That's all I'd ask.
That's awesome. Let's kind of start from the beginning a little bit. What inspired you to just even start this journey into writing your book, The Founders?
Yeah, it's because it's not actually like a book that anybody would expect that I would write in some ways. So I'll sort of take a step back. My last book was about a figure that I think should be better known, but some people know him. If you're an electrical engineer, you probably know him. If you're a mathematician, you probably know him. His name is Claude Shannon. And Claude Shannon worked at Bell Laboratories. Bell Labs, in the 20th century, there's basically no place that concentrates talent the way that Bell Labs does. And it just has like brilliant person after brilliant person. They win something like 7 Nobel Prizes. To give you a sense of the scale, they invent touch-tone dialing and satellites and cellular networks, right? So we can have this call because of and the transistor. We can have this chat because of what they did. And in thinking about kind of like what that ecosystem was like, I started to just think about like, what are other clusters of talent? What are other places where it's not one solitary genius in a garage, but where the garage is kind of full of different people who are really bright and built things. And in Silicon Valley history, there are a few places like that. Fairchild Semiconductor is one, Xerox PARC is another, and PayPal, famously known now as the PayPal Mafia, is another. And and this is just, for your audience's sake, just in the spirit of being authentic, I just went on Amazon, because I assumed somebody had done the book. A lot of my book ideas, the way it starts is like, I think someone's done the book and I go on Amazon and I kind of see what's available. And if what's available doesn't satisfy what I'm looking to add to cart, I will go and start to pursue it as a project. And so that's kind of how this one started. And then I had a friend who knew Peter Thiel. And I said to my friend, listen, here's my idea. I think that it's really kind of incredible and almost unbelievable that all of these Silicon Valley entrepreneurs worked at PayPal when they were in their 20s and early 30s. Could you set me up for a meeting? I have this concept I want to pitch to him. And my friend Ryan Holiday was generous enough to do that. And then I sort of said to Peter, I said, this is Lord of the Rings just set in Silicon Valley in 1999 and 2000. You have all these people, Elon, founders of YouTube, all of you come together at one place. How is that possible? And he went for it. And then that's kind of how it started from there.
Wow. That's really cool. So Bell Labs, does that have anything to do with like Alexander Graham Bell? Like, is there any
Yeah.
kind of
So
connection there?
it's so the Bell Telephone Company starts with Alexander Graham Bell. And what happens over time is like, I mean, imagine that you were Alexander, like you own a
Mm-hmm.
monopoly on all phone systems for however long. They are able to siphon some money and resources away to kind of an R&D wing called Bell Labs, Bell Laboratories. And that's particularly, I would say, like during the war years, during World War II, they basically become like the cream of the crop of scientists, mathematicians, engineers, and they put them, on understandably like all these projects related to the war, right? But a lot of the offshoots that happen after the war, a lot of the collaborations that happen there lead to like, I mean, the most sort of unbelievable technological breakthroughs around, right? And so like a good example is like in a space of 20 years, Bell Labs was working on improvements to the bazooka, and they were also working on, touch-tone dialing stuff. And so you sort of have this place that, because it had a federally guaranteed monopoly on
Mm-hmm.
the phone, I mean, they own the phone system.
Yeah,
So they
definitely.
had money to recruit people like the person that I wrote about, Claude Shannon.
Wow. So, fun fact, I was literally researching Alexander Graham Bell before this call with my
Whoa.
daughter.
Whoa.
Yes, her project, she's in second grade, is to research and sort of dress up as a certain person for school. She goes to a private school, and she was selected Alexander Graham Bell.
Wow.
And so today we were going through that, and
That's
yes,
great.
so relatively familiar, not an
Yeah.
expert, but a Wikipedia expert. And we had to go through the conversation of, honey, you can't just pick out the sentences from Wikipedia and write them in your report. It doesn't work that
Right. It
way.
doesn't work that way. That's funny.
Yes, when she was writing his biography sentences, and there was words that I knew she didn't know because she's 8. Uh, it was really funny, but
That's
it's all
very funny.
good. That's amazing. So, you had mentioned something about clusters of talent,
Hmm.
which is really interesting to me because, and I don't know if this is something you capture, but one of the things I've wondered is, we all know in success there's a lot that we talk about your circle and your association, how that leads to success. Well, I would think in a macro scale there could be something similar, which is why people move to places like LA, New York, Silicon Valley. Have you found there to be sort of a greater success for people who decide to go into those types of clusters?
It's I think the easy answer is yes, but let's sort of get into the texture of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Think of it like the way I sometimes like to think about it is sort of like this. Um, we put a lot of premium on who your mentors are, right? We talk a lot
Mm-hmm.
about mentorship. There's a lot of writing about mentorship, about who sort of reports, who you report to, and how that person kind of can determine success and
Mm-hmm.
failure in different respects. But we don't actually like spend all that much time talking about peer group and like the influence of people who are maybe at the same level as you, or
Mm-hmm.
if they're in another company, they're kind of around like the same level that you are. And I think that one of the things I take away from the PayPal story is how important that peer group is, not just who your mentors are. Because in a funny way, Silicon Valley, traditional mentorship only goes so far in a place like that. But peer groups rise together. And if you work next to somebody in a cubicle next to somebody and they go off and do something, you're on their list to be recruited. So that's sort of the broadest explanation. I would dive in and say I think there are cities that understandably cluster specific kinds of talent, but I'm not sure that you need to move to a place to find that kind of that kind of intimacy anymore, or that kind of connection anymore, right? I'll give you an example.
100%.
You and I don't know, have never met face to face, but we're
Mm-hmm.
connecting like this. I have a
Mm-hmm.
lot of friends that I call like my internet friends. Like we'll connect over Twitter, and I'll be honest with you, some of those friends, I'm better friends with them than I am with my
Yes,
real fresh and
it's
fun
true.
friends, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I think it's more of a frame of mind to me of thinking not just like how can I get to somebody who's maybe a few paces ahead of me in whatever field it is, but how do I actually like develop really good linkages kind of horizontally, like across my peer group, which one of the things that's true about this PayPal group is that after PayPal, the money, the personnel, a lot of the ideas for the things they went on to create. And by the way, we all use the things they went on to create, YouTube, Yelp, LinkedIn, SpaceX, Tesla, on and on. Those, there wasn't sort of a like mentor lifting somebody up. It was more peer groups working together and creating new things together.
I love that. Everything you just said was gold.
I think, by the way, the other
And
thing is it's very hard to think like this because sometimes we feel competitive with our peers, right?
mm,
And so it actually forces you to reframe it and to think about, like, you know, if you're, let's say, within an organization, the person who quote unquote is competing with you today could be somebody that's in a position to hire you somewhere else, next year, right? Or invest in
yeah.
you later. I think it actually reframes a lot of interactions if you think about a peer group that rises together, that goes through, ages and stages together. A lot of
Mm,
these peer groups become parents at the same time. It's subtle, but it's an important difference because think about how many Harvard Business Review articles there are about like how to land a mentor, right?
yes.
But there's very few that are like, how am I helping my generation or my peer group or my cohort succeed, right? It's a little bit of a different challenge.
That's beautiful. There's a saying that says a rising tide raises all ships. And to simplify that, I've always thought of as basically not having a lack mentality. Because a lot of people get in competition because they think there's a certain amount of pie, and if their friend gets it, they automatically get less. When they don't realize that everything in this world is created, a lot of it created from nothing. Therefore, there's really no lack of ability to create. There's no lack of money. There's more money in the world now than there ever has been, and so forth. And so, understanding that your friend, your peer group, rising, gaining, doing well is not actually bringing you down. It's not holding you back. In fact, it could do quite the opposite. So I love what you just said.
I think the other thing about it. This is like because we're on this subject. It's a great
Yeah.
place, and it's one of the things I rarely get to talk about with respect to this book because obviously people usually like, what was it like to interview Elon, that sort
Yeah.
of stuff. But I had this experience. I interviewed somebody who it was a person who worked there, not somebody who's going to make headlines, but somebody who played an important role. And one of the things that she shared with me is she said, Jimmy, what people underestimate is when I was at PayPal, because we were all around the same age, we were also all learning what equity was, what a
Mm.
401k was,
Yeah.
what RSUs, like restricted stock units, were. What does it mean to pay taxes on the like she's like basic finance. And she's like, look, you're
Yeah.
dealing with now people today who are regarded as like, smart, and some of them are billionaires. But at the time, they were all actually figuring these things out together. And she said one of the most important things that I learned from PayPal was not about startups or Silicon Valley or about technology or any of these big kind of high flown ideas. She said, I learned like basic personal finance from some of the smartest people in the world. And she said,
Mm.
and because they taught me when I was in my 20s, I have enough savings. And she had just sold a house. Like, it was a whole story about this. And I realized that, like, if you're in front of a mentor, you are going to actually be a little ashamed to ask your mentor questions about basic personal finance. But if you are with
Mm-hmm.
your peers, it's a totally different conversation. And the tenor is totally different.
Wow. I love that. And I would love to ask about Elon and stuff, but to be quite honest, some of those figures are so easily accessed through YouTube and different things that we pretty much feel like we know who they are, what they're about. That's the only reason I don't ask a lot of those questions because I'm really interested in knowing the differences of why some people reach certain things others don't, why certain groups hit things certain. I like to get behind the scenes, deep in the weeds, more than just. If you want to talk about Elon, obviously we can, but more than just the experience of meeting a sort of a celebrity, I guess you could say.
Well, and I'll say let's connect him to this conversation we were having.
Yeah.
One of the things that I kind of learned in my process of research is, because again, I was not focused on Elon of today. I was focused on Elon
Mm-hmm.
of 1990 to
Understand.
2002. So when he's much younger, basically his collegiate years and then the post collegiate years and then his PayPal years. One of the
Before we
things
knew
I
him.
learned is that when he was beginning his internships in Silicon Valley, nobody knew him. He wasn't Elon Musk. He was a guy from Canada who was a college student who and then University of Pennsylvania, who was out here for a summer, and he worked two internships, one by day and one by night. And it was at this Pinnacle Research Institute, which was researching like electrical energy and the uses to which electrical energy could be put. And then this video game company, Rocket Science Games. And he himself, like, it's again, his peer group in both of those places end up doing interesting things. Rocket Science Games was this sort of hub for innovative game design. And if you think about those experiences, there's not it's not like it's not like Steve Jobs found him and was like, I'm going to be your mentor, right? Which is actually not the way mentorship works at all generally. But I say this to emphasize that what I saw was peers lifting each other up, right? And sort of hiring each other, investing in each other. The first money into Yelp comes from Max Levchin, a PayPal alum. The first employees at YouTube, honestly, all they were basically it was like they transported the PayPal office over to YouTube, right? And so I think there's something to that, because I think it's hard to think in those terms because we always look up, we don't look sideways. And so there's a little bit of like, one of the things it's taught me is, what am I doing to help my peers who are in the book industry succeed? Because it's, as you said, it's not zero sum.
And you mentioned peer group, which is so interesting to me because nobody talks about it like that. Have you found any significant or I guess unique ways that someone would go about sort of finding or developing that peer group?
Well, I mean, I would say that with the book, the most poignant or powerful experience is just working together, right? Like your
Mm-hmm.
colleagues become those people, and I think that's true. Like that's not any kind of earth shattering insight. Like that kind of
Yeah.
happens, right? I I will say in my life, what's happened is, I would say that one of the things that's taking place is like online friendships that convert to offline friendships, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you see somebody on Twitter, they're maybe involved in the same things, you connect with them, they say something interesting, you say something interesting back, and that can graduate to be something more meaningful than just a bunch of tweets at each other, right? Um, I have also seen conferences play this role. Like I kind of, I'm not the person who attends every conference, but I find that I get more out of conferences than I would have thought. And it generally is not because I heard somebody speak. It's generally because I had dinner with somebody who ended up being a friend, right? A very close friend of mine, actually, it's funny, his name is Brandon Kleiman. He's an entrepreneur in Los Angeles. He's really, really smart. Brandon and I have maintained a friendship that's gone on for like, I think, a decade and a half now. We met at a conference a decade and a half ago, and we just started having meals together while we were there. And it was just fun. And so I think, but I sort of say that to say I wasn't there to connect with speakers. I was there to connect with people like Brandon, right? And so I think that's like some of the tools and techniques. I would say more though. Probably the way to put it. I think networking gets a bad name, and it gets like a bad rap, and for good reason. Networking sounds too clinical. It sounds too transactional. I think that the people I know who do it best are really looking to do what you described, which is like expand the pie, right? What's the intro I could make that would help John get a guest that would be really great for him, right? Or something along those lines. And that I think happens more easily with people who you are if you were doing a sort of org chart of life, they are kind of at the same level as you, right? I think it's a more natural interaction, and I think even thinking about it can lead you to start to do it.
Yeah, a lot of people ask me, "How did you meet this person or so and so?" And honestly, not all the people that they see me that I've met maybe on the show am I best friends with, but we were connected for at least an hour basically. I always tell them, I'm like, well, the best way to get those connections is to you help somebody else meet somebody, get a connection, get an extra client, whatever that is. Anytime you see that opportunity, connect them. It doesn't matter if it's going to, most people get in their own way. They think, oh, if I reach out and ask if they want this connection, they're going to think it's silly. I'm like, no, people really feel gratitude towards you reaching out and saying, hey, I have this friend who might be able to help your business, your book, your podcast. Would you be cool if I made the connection? They may not need it, but they will not forget that you did that because there was no strings attached. You were just doing it to help. And when you do that enough and you sow that seed enough times, I promise those things are coming back. You'll get more connections, more things like that. That's how we connected. I met
Yep.
someone at a conference, good friends who own the company Book Thinkers. We talked about in the back channel, and we just chatting out in a courtyard, honestly. And they asked me if I would get one of their authors on my show. Just, hey, would you do this? I said, sure. And then he said, hey, if you do, I'll get you another guy on your show as well. And I was like, well, that'd be appreciated, but it's not a requirement. But I'd love to have him on my show. So I did, and honestly, the guest was amazing. And then it's been one after another, and that's how me and you met.
Yep.
Because just in a courtyard conversation at a conference, like you just
Yeah.
mentioned.
I
It was
think I
not.
think the part of it, just to interject for a second, because I get a lot of satisfaction when I introduce two people and they
Mm-hmm,
go off and do a thing that has nothing to do with me. I don't know how
100%.
I love it when that happens. To
It's
me,
beautiful.
it's magical. I mean, it really is magical when I can, like, I'll send an email and I'll find out 3 months later that they ended up having some like epic dinner, or they created something
Mm-hmm.
together, or they built a company, or one person, did something for the other person. That, to me, there's like no more satisfying form of leverage than
Mm-hmm.
that, where it's like the way I levered up, the world's sort of goodwill was connecting these two people, and I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to plan anything. There were no logistics. All I did was introduce two people. I find the few things give me more joy in life.
It's true. It's like magic when they make something and potentially it could be life changing for one or both, and then you had a piece in that, and it wasn't. It's like Christmas. You weren't giving to receive anything. You were just giving because you thought it would be something special for them, and then it worked out, and
Yeah.
you couldn't be more happy. You're not trying to find a percentage or
Right.
anything like that. You're just thrilled.
Yeah.
So that's
And
beautiful.
I'll say, actually, this is funny because I didn't know this going in. I'm not a Silicon Valley person.
Mm-hmm.
I sort of
Yeah.
live on the East Coast. I use technology, but I'm not a writer about technology. Um, Silicon Valley is one of the things that people miss is how quickly and easily introductions are made. One of the
Mm-hmm.
things that happened to me as I was going through this process is that I discovered that the people that I was interviewing were very open to introducing me to the next three people I needed to interview. I didn't expect that. I didn't know that it's very much standard practice to just do intros, because the whole place is built to have these kinds of collisions
Mm-hmm.
and then create things. And it was really interesting because even people who your listeners would recognize, like bold face names, super important, super busy people, would take time to send introductions, and it would happen so fast. And I think somebody who's a bit of an outsider to Silicon Valley, it's almost like at first it's almost jarring how fast it happens, right? Because you never really know if it's going to happen, but it happened so effortlessly in some ways that it was almost like it was a part of Silicon Valley DNA. Like the writing of many introductions is like a part of Silicon Valley DNA that I did not know existed before I got there.
It's an email template for them, right? Click,
That's
click, send.
that's right. That's right.
So that's amazing because I wonder if, and maybe you would have an insight. So I live in the Midwest, and a lot of people here are, I would say, almost like you would call like legacy families. They've been here for generations and generations. I was a military person from Southern California who kind of transplanted here. And it took a while to get used to some things, or just how they do things. But when you go to California in certain areas, most people there were not I shouldn't say most. A lot of the people in certain pockets of California, and when I visited New York City, I noticed this too. They're basically transplants. Like they weren't, their family's not from there, and they chose to move there for some reason. I mean, there's unique things about each. When I was in New York City, the coolest thing I realized is that every restaurant I went to, there was somebody at a table close to me within an earshot speaking a language that I couldn't even identify.
That's good. That's
I mean,
great.
it just, sometimes you're like, oh, I understand they're speaking Spanish or French. And some of these I had never heard of. And that's something I didn't expect to gather while I was just hanging out in New York City for a weekend. And I thought it was cool and how diverse it really was. Just never thought about it. Do you think there's something, is that part of the reason why then that people are so quick to network? Because everybody there essentially is not really from there.
It's a really good point, and I had not thought of it until you said it. So I would be lying if I was like, yes, that's
Yeah.
no. Let's peel it back a bit, which is, I think you're absolutely right. If you are new to a place, you probably have some anxiety about not knowing anybody in that place.
Mm-hmm.
And so your instinct is, wow, I really got to get to know people. And it turns out, if you're in Silicon Valley, you're in a place where it's like unusually open to introductions. And then maybe once you've had a year or two of those kinds of introductions, you're more open to doing that for somebody else. And because nobody's really from there, you might be right. Like, it's kind of how the place operates. Like, it could be in the internal logic of it. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know enough to know. What I am able to say is I was on the receiving end of, I mean, hundreds of introductions. because I daisy chained these introductions so that I could interview the people I needed to interview. Because you can't just like up and email Elon. It's sort of off putting if it's not coming through somebody. And so I found though that it was specific to Silicon Valley, the speed with which they happened and the openness that people had to doing those kinds of intros. And if you think about it, it makes perfect sense. There usually isn't one big venture capital firm that's invested in a startup. It's usually a bunch of investors, right? There's usually not one founder and that they create the whole company. They need a team. So presumably they've had to recruit this team. And because the place operates as quickly as it does, intros need to be sent fast and pretty no frills. A lot of times somebody would send intros, be like, hey, Jimmy, introducing you to so-and-so. Good luck. Thanks. And that was it. That was all that needed to be said, because the assumption was we've got to keep this moving, but I'm still going to do the generous act of introing you. But I think your broader point is right, which is maybe it's because nobody's from there and everybody needs to know somebody when they get started. I heard this story. I don't know if it's true, and I never could pin down if it was true. But somebody told me that when Elon first arrived in Silicon Valley, he stood outside of rocket science games with a sign that said "Will code for food," and it was so brazen that the people hired. I didn't even put it in the book because I couldn't really fact check it or whatever. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like him, but I couldn't pin it down, and it was such a small moment in the story. But he said it was like a will code for food, and that's how he got his job. But the bosses thought it was sort of brazen enough and interesting enough. They were like, "Hey, this guy must know something." He got our attention. But I think you're right. He was new there. Every subsequent generation, there's a lot of immigrants in Silicon Valley. So they're not just new to Silicon Valley, they're new to the United States. I could see your thesis being very true, but I hadn't thought about it until now.
There's your next book. So what is something you didn't expect to learn when writing this book with all the research and the intros and just meeting all these great people? What is something you just like, wow, I did not expect to get that during this process?
It's a great question. I think one of the things that I didn't anticipate. I'll do two. I'll give you a twofer because one's probably something that many people might have expected if they knew Silicon Valley. And the other is just totally unexpected. The first one is I did not expect to learn that a company whose services I use, PayPal, somewhat regularly, whose founders are all sort of rich and famous, I did not expect that the company would have come as close to death as it did, as often as it did. Like, it really was a company that was basically built on thin ice the entire time. The number of times they almost went bankrupt, the various crazy things that happened to them and around them, the environment, the dot-com bubble bursting. I mean, you and I are old enough to remember that, like to remember what it was like when the NASDAQ lost 86% of its value, right? So But I don't think I really appreciated how close PayPal came to failure, because its founders are so successful that you just, even I, skeptical writer person, operate with this sort of like, well, I'm sure they figured it out. But actually, they came very close to death multiple times. The second thing I would say is I think it's hard when you're writing about people who are as well known as some of the people I wrote about. I don't think I appreciated their humanity, and just like how some of the challenges that they face were just so human and so kind of, basic things that any of us might deal with. That sounds a little blasé. Let me get specific. During the time I was writing about him, the years I'm writing about Elon, 1998 to 2002, when he's involved with PayPal, his infant son dies of SIDS. Elon himself almost dies in a car accident. He gets malaria and meningitis and almost dies again in a way came with a hair's breadth. And he gets kicked out of the company, PayPal, that he created. And in the aftermath of those personal challenges, he goes off to build SpaceX and obviously takes Tesla to its current state. I think it's really easy to forget that there's a part of these people's lives that is not covered in the media, that is about the challenges they face in their personal lives, or just quirky 100%. Things that happen in their personal lives, or books they read. And I had the fortune, because I was talking to them about something that happened so long ago, to actually go into that more. And it just gave me a new perspective. It's neither good nor bad. It's more that when I read things about them now, I have a little bit of a filter. And the filter is just sort of, don't forget that they're people too.
Wow. That's so true. We put people on a pedestal and just assume life goes perfect, when the reality is their family gets sick just like our family gets sick.
Mm-hmm.
They have death just like ours do, bad days and good days. That's amazing. I love the perspective. So we wrap up every episode with something called off script. Basically, it's your gift to the audience with your sort of words of wisdom. Like, what would you like to leave our audience with your off script moment?
I would say this. If there is something in the world that has delighted you, a painting, a statue, a book, a podcast episode, anything. I mean, it can be anything. I don't think I can oversell how powerful it is for the creator of that thing to get a note from you in some way. You can write to them, you can email them, you can tweet at them, you can slip into their DMs, whatever we're using, messenger pigeon, I don't know, whatever the latest craze is. Because I have found that in my life where I've written books, there's basically no better moment than when someone has like read the book, liked it, and just let me know that they read it and liked it, right? Because a lot of these things are like messages in a bottle. You sort of throw them into the ocean, you hope somebody reads it, right? That's that, but I would say that's true across the board. I have tried to live out this habit. If I read something online that I like a good essay, it's like automatic. I will just write to the person that took the time to do it for no other reason than that I think that we should do more of that, right? Because it's not for network, there's no purpose to it. It is actually like a pure expression of gratitude for the creative thing that is in the world. My daughter used to ride this carousel in Brooklyn, Jane's Carousel, all the time. I mean, we rode this like 200 times. Like, I'm embarrassing now. I know every nook and cranny of that carousel. And I remember one day just writing to Jane, the namesake. It's the person who sort of is the carousel's named for. And I said, Jane, thank you for the carousel. Here's some photos of my daughter. And we ended up actually becoming very close. She passed away a couple years ago. But I just would encourage your audience that if it can be it can be anything, whatever it is, find who the creator is and find a way to get them a note, because it is actually the thing that a lot of people don't ever get. They'll do something. They'll plant a tree and like nobody ever comes and, and that's all they want. And it is a moment where you get to appreciate the effect that person's creation has had on you. Right. And what a great thing. Like, that's like it's so easy. It's so easy, John. Like, this is not a hard thing, right? You don't have to labor over your note. You don't have to go digging for postage stamps. Mm-hmm. It is as simple as an email. But I think that is super important, especially at a time when people are creating more than ever. Then you can often feel like the work you do is sort of shouting into the ether. I think if the audience could do that, like, you will, there's sort of karma points will come back.
100%. Wow. Guys, this has been an incredible conversation with Jimmy Soni. I encourage you highly to go get his book, The Founders, the story of PayPal and the entrepreneurs who shaped Silicon Valley. You can definitely connect with Jimmy. Go to @JimmyASoni, JimmyASoni. You can also go to his website, jimmysoni.com. And as always, you can connect with us at Unscripted at any platform. Just go to Unscripted Leadership. Jimmy, it's been an amazing episode. Thank you so much for coming on. Guys, as always, we pray that you be the leader that God has called you to be. God bless.